The auto follow function will allow us to set an element that follows another element. There are many different ways you can use this function, so let's set up a simple scene here that explains how to use it. And what we'll do is we'll create a scene here using a cylinder, and let's just throw a material on this so we can see the cylinder a little bit better. And also I want to use a font, so I'm going to come in here and grab a font from my folder and drag this down into the scene tree as well. Now I want to set this scene up so that as my cylinder grows, I want the font to follow it wherever it grows. So I'm going to first go into my cylinder, and what I'm going to do is set my center point. By default, my cylinder is set to center here, and I'm in the cylinder editor. I can set the center point within the cylinder editor itself, so I'm going to set it to bottom. We could also come into the transform axis and set the center point to bottom in here, but since we did it in the cylinder, it's already set to bottom. I'm also going to set the scaling to single, because what I want it to do is when we scale this on the Y scale, I want it to grow from the bottom. So I'm going to move my cylinder down to the bottom. Now we want to set this up so that as the cylinder grows, the font is going to grow with it. So I'm going to use the auto follow function to set this up. And I'm going to drag the auto follow function right onto my font. I'm going to click on my auto follow function, go into the auto follow editor. First thing that we have here is the X previous center. Well, we don't want to deal with the X scale, so I know that I want it to follow the cylinder on the Y, so I need to come down here into the direction and set the direction first. So I want to change this to Y instead of the default setting of X. And once I change it to Y, up here at the very top it now says Y previous center. So the Y previous center is standing for what's our previous container here. And our previous container in the scene tree is the cylinder. So what was the center point that we set to that? It was bottom. So I'm going to change this setting to bottom. You also have a default distance here, a progress percentage, and a maximum distance tabs. We'll come back to these and set these up after everything else is set up. We also have a reference container. It says previous, first, and other. We can use previous because our cylinder is the first container in the scene tree, and it's the previous container to our font. We could also change it to first in this case because we only have two containers and the cylinder would be the first container, or we could change it to other. Once we change it to other, we get this blank box here, and we could actually drag the cylinder up into there. So in this case, it doesn't matter which one we would use, they would all be correct. We already set the direction, which is Y. Now the last thing that we need to adjust is the Y local center. Well, our font here is the Y local center. It's the local container that we have the auto follow on. So we never adjusted the center point of it, but we can check it. So if we come into our transform axis, we can check the center point, and we can either change it to center or bottom, either or. We'll set it to bottom for right now, and when we come back into auto follow, what we'll want to say is our Y local center is set to bottom. Now if I come back into my cylinder and I adjust the Y scale, you can see how this font is now following it wherever it goes. So now we can come back into our auto follow function editor, and we can adjust our default distance or a progress percentage or the maximum distance allowed. So we have this set now, and no matter how high we scale our cylinder or where we move it, this font will follow it. So if we want to do another example here, let's say we also want to use a font and we want to create a cursor that follows the font. So I'm going to drag my font down here, and we'll just move it to the left side. And this time, let's say we want to kind of create like a blinking cursor perhaps that follows the font as we type on. So again, I'm just going to throw a material on our rectangle so we can see it. And I'm going to go back into the functions tab. I'm going to grab my auto follow, and this time I'm going to drag it onto my rectangle. And I'm going to go into my auto follow function editor, and this time we're going to work on the X direction. So under direction here, our X is set, and our X previous center here, our font center point is set to left, and our X local center point is set to center, so I'm going to change this one to center. Now as I come back into my font editor, you can see this rectangle follow the font wherever we type. And if we want to come back and make adjustments, let's say we want to kind of make this a little bit thinner in our rectangle, and we want to kind of offset the distance a little bit, we can do that as well. So no matter where we type or what we type in here, this little box is now going to follow our font. So two quick examples of how the auto follow work.